Thank you, Khaled. I'm delighted to have such a closely knit panel and people with whom I've worked, I think, for the past decade now. Um, I have some hesitation in saying that because I hope I don't look as old in saying that it's been 15 years that it's been in this profession and dealing with all of you. But thank you so much. I think to very quickly introduce, I have Sanjay Dutt, Managing Director of Tata Housing and Tata Realty, pretty much a real estate behemoth now that has been created. I have Varun Singh. Um, Varun is heading the South Asia, India and Southeast Asia for Allianz. And as you know, Allianz has several investment platforms, the Chapotree and others. Uh, I've dealt with Varun earlier in his role in Kotak, and we've just fortunately reconnected after a long time, and it's great, to have you, Varun. Thank you. And I have with me um, Shreyas Bhushan. Shreyas is a senior member of our private equity M&A practice and has been very active on structuring and designing some of the investment platforms across core assets, warehousing, and other stabilized asset classes in real estate and infrastructure as well. He's also been very closely involved in setting up some of the listed, unlisted InvITs, which, as you know, are very closely aligned to the REIT platform. And lastly, I have the most permanent fixture in all our webinars, Shobhit. From 2007, there hasn't been a single webinar where Shobhit has not been there. He is a name I think pretty much everyone knows in the real estate industry. You can't be existing without knowing him. Earlier, JLL, and now the MD and CEO of Anarok. Shobhit has advised obviously on a lot of these platforms, real estate. Uh, I am going to make a slight departure here, and unlike the usual way in which NDA usually moderates, because Shobhit is such a family, I'm going to ask Shobhit for you to kindly moderate the session, okay? And I and the NDA team will be your guests. So why don't you lead it, and why don't you start with your expert advice and words.
Thank you, Ruchir, for your kind introduction to all of us. For sure we are like family, all of us. We worked together for a long time. Thank you, all the participants, and hope you are all safe joining us. We have like they mentioned, we have about an hour where I'm going to quiz my colleagues here, and try and make the most of it. Today's subject is emerging structures and platforms for investments in commercial real estate. Um, you know, I think these kind of programs for India was set up about 7 or 8 years ago, where it's led by people such as Godrej, who started the first platform for residential. Very quickly, they did one more for offices. Then that moved on, and we have Shapurji doing it. We had RMZ doing a platform with QIA, and several other products or platforms were set and also are in existence. This came about post GFC when people thought it's not appropriate to do deals just by asset or project by project, and they thought it's better to have a long-term sustainable partnership that actually benefited both. And since then, this segment has been growing vis-a-vis sort of attracting FDI into Indian real estate. Uh, about 8 platforms have already been set up. Uh, a couple of the boys are in the room, both on the capital side as well as those who benefited from these platforms. Before I get there, can I just ask Ruchir? Ruchir, you've been in middle of some of these uh, creation of platforms. You've helped them in right sizing, putting the right governance structure, corporate structure, all of that. So, what in your mind is changed? What's the 5 things that you would put together and say these are the emerging trends, right? From what was there and what is going on now. So, literally about 5 minutes, if you can speak about it. So you make the beginning, and then I'll take it to everybody.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. I think it has been very interesting to see how real estate has kind of shaped up, and we've been some of the early movers right from the days of Press Note 2 of 2005. The kind of ambiguities it created and the doors it opened to foreign investment in a big way. Uh, we've seen it turn from equity to structured debt to debt, and now again shifting towards equity. So I think we've seen the whole cycle, and we have also seen the cycle where, we used to see, Shobhit, remember the distribution waterfalls, and Sanjay, you'll remember, you know, 14 to 18 so much, 18 to 20 so much, 20 to 24 so much, and 24% plus IRR, you get so much waterfall. And I used to wonder when, so many times when foreign clients visited, they said 24% IRR, this is insane, and I think a lot of those ambitious LPs suffered massively, and no hesitation in saying that a lot of the foreign LPs sort of burned their fingers in the hopes of making 24%, sometimes north of 28% IRR also. And I think the lesson that was broadly learned was that in the three P's, you know, property, partner, and price, partners sort of outstripped all the other factors. You could have a great property, you could buy it at a great price, but you didn't have a great promoter or a great partner with you, you know, it sort of didn't flare up well. So I think it was largely that promoter preference that drove a lot of the investment platforms, both on the LPGP side of it and also on the developer side of it. Uh, on the LPGP side, I think today, no hesitation in saying that there are hardly any uh, blind pools, so to say, the way generally the fund industry works. And almost real estate is largely functioning on what we call as managed accounts, which means GP shows the LPs that, listen, this is a deal I'm looking to invest. LP scrutinizes it way more than it would do any other asset class, and then says, okay, I will invest in this. That's a trend, I think, pretty much in real estate and certain infra classes. So blind pools are almost non-existent. And I think the LPs also chose their GPs who were sort of the better performing ones. It became a big boys game. And on the same side, and on the same sort of alignment, GPs also chose their partners. So I think the trend became very, very clearly that, listen, these are the 4 or 5 people we like, and we will partner with these 4 or 5 people. And the big boys who had their reputation, who had their, who had their track record and performance track record, always got more money. And there was no sort of capital shortage for them because there were a lot of capital chasing them. And at the same time, you know, we heard both sides of the story: too much capital chasing too few people, and there were always a few developers who had no money. And I think this has been largely the genesis in my mind of the investment platforms, where you sort of partner with a few developers. The developer is then obligated in certain exclusion areas, say certain tier one cities, certain kind of market, whether it's mid market or luxury or affordable, and say you identify or ring fence the parameters of your partnership and say within this you are sort of exclusive. I think one of the first initial platforms that we did was, Godrej APG, where I think it was largely in the nature of, the developer sort of acted as a pure developer. He got the development management fees, and he was also a shareholder. So he was a minority shareholder in that sense, but control substantial because the brand was in question, and there was always a development management fees that was being paid on a per square feet basis or a construction cost basis, and so on and so forth. That was the sort of trend that started. Uh, I think what happened later is that developers also progressed, and they said, well, if we can manage financial investors so well, then why just be restricted to being development managers? Why not become money managers? And that was the first time that we structured one of the largest developers as actually a money manager. So the developer actually set up an offshore fund vehicle, became a fund manager, and pooled the funds that funds were invested into the projects of the developer itself, obviously on an arm's length basis. But the developer not just earned the development management fees, but also earn the fund management fees, the 220, the carried interest and the management fees. So this was the classic model, how we saw the seasoned developers sort of moving in to the next level. I think another sort of platform that we also did on the construction side, was, what we did, in the Goldman, Warburg and Piramal kind of a platform. That was not really a self-liquidating asset or an SPV by SPV. That was also sort of platform where you were really investing in the construction abilities of the developer, and there was an IPO story there. It was not really a REIT story. So there are different kind of platforms which have existed, and different kind of foreign investors have put in funds and money into some of these things. I think I will just come on to the trends, Shobhit, in a bit after Varun and Sanjay have spoken on some of the commercial trends. But on the more nitty-gritties of the structures that are evolving. But sometimes I do wonder, that from a developer perspective, what is it in it for the developer? I've often wondered that, because a developer offers exclusivity, says that I will not undertake anything in these projects, but the investor is absolutely free to see a project, make the developer run up the preliminary business plans and so, and then finally say, look, I'm not interested. The developer is pretty much uh, a victim of all the protocols, and the investor is totally free. So at one end, I think investment platforms have sort of given the flavor that if they have the firepower of large investors and large brand names, is obviously very fashionable. When you say Allianz is backing you, oh God, it looks very fashionable. But the fact is that the investors really have the flexibility to say no. Obviously, they may not say no. They might still do the deal, but really from a developer perspective, all those who were scrounging for investment platforms, I think it is very important to set out the governance structure well, because an investor by its very design and nature cannot be restricted from, cannot be sort of subjected to say that they will not do the deal elsewhere. Of course, as a platform level, they may be restricted from partnering with someone else in exactly the same parameters, but if a deal is shown to them, they don't like it, they can always say no. But a developer has to show, and therefore they're restricted in a way. So I'll just come to the top 5 pointers in a bit, but that was my broad background. Maybe I'll
So
comment on the 5 things after you.
yeah, let me pull in Sanjay at this point. He's been both as on the he's had long experience on advisory side, and then now with after that with Ascenders, and now with Tata Realty and Tata Housing. Sanjay, you are managing you were managing a multi-pool fund for Tata Realty, which had almost 15, 16 investors, to now moving on to almost like a managed account with Actis. What's your experience been? And if you are going to do one more fund or one more platform, how will you choose the capital provider? Do you have a specific sort of a wish list? Do you want this kind of capital?
I can answer the second question first, Shobhit. So we want patient capital. So that's clear. And I think it's plenty available. You know, there are 3 or 4 sovereign players who have really understood India. They've invested a lot in understanding India, and they have put the right local team, which is far better equipped in terms of knowledge, insight, skills than the ones who came in early after 2005. The first question, you were talking about Actis. What did we see and why are we doing it? The most important thing when I was on the consulting side and then on the developer side, I realized you can have partnerships, but if you don't have genuinely alignment of objectives and your team profile, the way we conduct our business, if it's not really, the chemistry doesn't exist, you you will never be able to grow the business. You will never be able to scale that business that you thought you would. And I was quite pleased that Actis, with their local team, a combination of professionals with banking and real estate background, made a very good mix in the first place. And the people involved, both Ashish and Mukesh and his team, They've actually done leasing. They've actually done construction. They've actually done, management. So that has made them far more aligned to market than any other player. And that gave me a lot of comfort. And our system and processes are so well refined that we don't even need to host our board meetings. Our internal reviews, Shobhit, Actis now participates in it, just like a local developer would carry out the function. We don't need to first do our review and then make a review with the Actis and therefore manage the board. There is absolutely transparent professional relationship. Of course, during this journey, last 2 years, we had to answer certain questions which were also there. We wanted to grow our commercial business, whether Actis has the appetite, whether Actis, how Stancy moved to Actis. Even that journey we had to go through and understand how it's going to pan out. The pleasant surprise for me was that the Actis team, right from the global head to Asia to India, had similar conclusions the way I did. They felt partnering with Tata extremely transparent and professional. They felt extremely comfortable. And all the business strategies that we discussed and we thrashed out and very transparently and openly, we saw an alignment. So, if we have 100 rupees and 80% will go in the IT parks, 20% we should keep for front office. We should restrict our entry to key markets like NCR, Mumbai, Bangalore, Pune, Hyderabad, Chennai, not Calcutta, not Kochi, not any other adventure. The micro markets, forget about cities. We want to be in Thane Belapur Road. We want to be in Mumbai city. We want to be in Outer Ring Road in Bangalore. Even the detailing of every aspect was done in such detail that we don't need to devise a strategy. It is a very well-defined strategy. And then look at the exits we started doing of our mature assets. Even there, their first investment was IT4 building in Goregaon. And we thought the maturity of the asset and the quality of the asset, we thought this is the right time perhaps to exit. And it made sense for us as well, right? So I think that was really valuable. And one last point from my principal point of view, Bombay House point of view, Tata Sons point of view, if you have a credible partner with you, you get the comfort of just extra layer of discipline and eyes on the business so that you don't make any knee-jerk reaction and a stupid move which kind of derails the business. Because very often you've seen some of the most mature developers confronted with the situation of the market. Like many people, I remember in 2008, called me and said, Sanjay, do you think we missed the market? And right after that, things crashed. So they were actually right. They never missed the market. So I think things like that, when you deliberate with a partner beside the board, you get certain other benefits beside the capital that they bring. Shobhit.
Chemistry with the sorry. Chemistry with the partner is very important, Sanjay. And second, it does bring in an extra level of discipline and corporate governance, especially if the teams are very aligned. Varun, I'm going to move over to you. Varun, you've invested with Shapurji in India on a build-to-core office, as well as a few other platforms, including logistics. First question first, how important is partner selection and how do you go about it? When you're looking at it, is it your number one priority, or do you have any other sort of filters to start thinking about a platform?
I think first step would be to take a view on the market. Obviously, once you have taken a view on the market, then partner selection in that market becomes the most important thing. Before moving to partner selection, I think first you need to be sure about the strategy. These are development platforms, but you can end up holding these assets for long term, given that there are limited number of investors in each of these platforms. Or you could pursue a build to sell sort of strategy, depending on which asset class or what your actual expectation from the market is. Once you have made the mind about the market, the strategy, then depending on the strategy, you look at the partner. Obviously, you would want someone to have all-round skill, both during the development phase, but also during the hold period, which is post-stabilization or post-completion. Uh, for investors, not unlike ourselves, who are looking at taking long-term view on the market, looking to hold core assets, I think, especially given the disruption in the market now, the partner who is more agile or can pivot strategy quickly during the hold phase or during the operations phase, that skill set would gain more prominence because you can find land parcels, you can do a decent job of construction. But if you are really looking to hold those assets for long term, you would need some partner who would be able to deliver the performance which you expect. Now, a corollary to this is Ruchir talked about developers being money managers and sort of doing both the roles. I see probably going forward, there could be a new species of pure money managers who would be working on a fee just to manage the asset for me. Because in terms of sourcing, uh, what we feel, it's especially for sectors like office, it's not really a challenge. There are very few transactions every year. Everyone knows everybody. It's a small, friendly community in India. So sourcing may not be the differentiating skill, but managing that asset for you could be a new skill set people need to evaluate.
Sorry, just one question to you, Varun. When you said pivot the whole strategy, I wanted to understand what do you mean by that?
Not the whole,
Because,
but let's talk about office.
right.
We were on a trend to make the offices dense, improve your efficiency, how many people per 100 square feet, that sort of thing. Post COVID, there could be some changes in this entire perspective of office, which we are not sure of as of now. I mean, a lot of people have a lot of predictions. I don't see much conviction behind any of it. So we don't know which way this will go. That's where the agility or the ability to quickly adapt and offer what your tenants demand would be a key skill going forward.
Yeah, got it.
Thank you,
Okay.
Varun. I do want to continue with you, Varun. Two questions. Since you're sitting in Singapore, and I'm aware that your group has made investments in multi countries within Asia and in multiple strategies. Uh, Very quick, 5 minutes view of your perception of what's going on in India, and in such markets, will you look to double down, or will you stay put, or will you run away? So what is what's what's that view? And second, two sectors you've invested in, which is office and industrial. Um, I think both seem like they're on a different path post COVID. What's your view? Will you prefer one sector over the other?
So across the region, obviously, the COVID situation was unprecedented, unforeseen. It's difficult to judge in most of the markets which way this will turn out to be. But we have been active, and so before coming to that, I think our investment strategy or thesis long term is to just go for core assets. Globally, that's what we follow. In Asia Pacific, when we started about 4 years back, our exposure started with taking investments through the funds, which now moved to JVs and then finally to doing direct transactions. So we have been getting deeper into the investment cycle, so to say. In the Asia Pac region, if you were to look at super core markets, you would obviously consider Japan, you would look at Singapore, Australia, the key cities to an extent. And then you will try to balance out the core returns with development returns or value add returns from China, from India, primarily. Some people have taken views on Indonesia, on Malaysia. We don't have those exposures yet, but we are invested heavily in China and in India, like you mentioned. For the core strategies in Japan, in Australia, we are going ahead. Obviously, there are changes in the way we evaluate and way we negotiate the transactions in current scenario. But our view is intact in most of these markets for long term. On different asset classes, I think office is something which no one is really sure of. For logistics, it seems as if it will be beneficial long term. Hotels, obviously, hotels and retail are probably the worst affected sectors in this. Retail may bounce back quicker, but hotels apparently it looks like will stay down for some time. Office, like I said, there are different factors people keep pointing. De-densification is something which all of us have learned very recently. People are saying now tenants will require larger offices to maintain the social distancing. Counter argument to that is now people have realized you don't really need offices to get people to work. So they may not take these expensive offices, may maintain some satellite offices. So we'll have to see how it evolves from here. Hopefully it won't be too bad, but yeah.
Thank you, Varun. So you're
Sorry,
saying,
just one question on that point of Varun. Varun, would you be preferring to invest in stabilized offices or also developmental assets now that considering
In
post-COVID?
many cases, especially in markets like India, people go through the development cycle with the development partner to take eventually to get access to a stabilized core asset. Obviously, you can have investors who are just interested in development returns, but there is a growing set of investors who are keen to take this route so that eventually they get access to a stabilized core asset, which uh, having gone through the development cycle would be really good opportunity for them to stay invested in that asset for longer term. If we get an opportunity to acquire direct stabilized core assets, I think we would be very keen on that. In absence of those opportunities, we are invested and we will look to invest in these development platforms.
Because only thing was that some supply was limited. So I think people were keenly looking at ground up commercial. But anyways, yeah, got it. Yeah, sorry, Shobhit. Go ahead.
so Varun, I'm going to come back to you on these strategies, but let me at this point bring in Shreyas. Shreyas, can you speak about what corporate governance a little bit more in details? You know, this word is quite loosely spoken about, saying corporate governance must be good, high standard of corporate governance. How do you actually measure it? How do you document it? And what are your views, especially for these platforms that we are talking about?
Absolutely.
Shreyas? Shreyas?
Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay. I think before we get into the details on governance issues as such, I think Ruchir briefly mentioned this at the start. RE platforms are by and large very similar to what we see in JV structures from an issue identification and resolution perspective. Having said that, I think our objective is to draw from our experience and identify three key important issues that get extensively negotiated in RE platform transactions. We generally call this the 3D negotiation that happens. The 3Ds being decision making, default, and consequences of a default, and deadlock and how do you resolve a deadlock. Pretty much the focus of all our transactions on governments boils down to these 3Ds. Let's maybe spend some time on each of these Ds and also have inputs from the other panelists on what they've seen. On the first one, which is decision making, I think it's fairly straightforward. It forms the core of any discussion around the platform. Who takes the decisions of the platform? Quite frankly, I have seen both extremes. One extreme where developers are in complete control of the platform and investors take an entirely passive. And the other extreme, which is increasingly the trend now, where investors pretty much double up as the developers as well, have a say in every single aspect of the transaction. and pretty much run the show as good as the developers themselves. But with time, what we are seeing with time, and as we see transactions becoming more and more mature, this tendency to over-optimize on both sides is slowly reducing. And a couple of trends are emerging to address these issues. One is at the platform level, we're looking at platforms setting up committees akin to, let's say, an investment committee. And this committee will have representation from both sides of the aisle. You have the developers and the investors being represented. The role of this committee, in short, take all strategic and key management decisions in the best manner possible and in the fastest time possible. How do you achieve this? We've seen documents now uh, explain in great detail on what are the parameters on the basis of which these decisions have to be taken by these committees, so that you induce some sort of certainty and speed to the process. Maybe let's just pick up one example. Let's say there's a GP, this GP identifies a project, brings it to the committee for approval for the platform to invest. Now, if the GP does not have a sense of direction, then pretty much the GP is shooting in the dark on what the investors in the platform can agree. And there's a very high possibility that there is a constant, I would say, veto, or there's a constant refusal by the platform and the investors to take up the project. And this could be frustrating for the GPS. How do you address this? You address this now by introducing all key parameters that have to be considered before you introduce a project. What do you mean by that? You pick up the nature of project, commercial, residential, you look at luxury, affordable housing, minimum IRR requirements for the investor, geography, etc., etc. You factor all of this in the documentation. Then the GP has some sense of direction. So what does the GP do? GP identifies a project, prepares a business case, explains how each of these parameters are fulfilled, brings it to the investment committee or an oversight committee, so to speak, and this committee then deliberates on it and approves it. What are we achieving through this, or what is intended to be achieved through this? I think there are two things. One, there's no expectation mismatch between what the developer is looking at and what the investors are looking at. So you're looking at a situation where there are no disputes upfront, and you have a mechanism to alleviate disputes. And second, most important reason is because you have a decision making with the right speed and the right alacrity, so that opportunities don't get missed out in the intra developer investor discussion, and eventually the developer is not okay with such an outcome. So this is what we've seen as the first key trend that is coming. The second trend on decision making that we've seen is how do you resolve inter-investor conflicts? Simply put, is it possible theoretically that a minority investor holding, let's say, a very small percentage decides for whatever reasons, good, not good, whatever reasons, to hold up an important transaction at the platform level, and thereby brings the entire platform to a standstill while all other investors and the developer are fine? Is it theoretically possible? The answer to that is yes. What is the solution that we are seeing nowadays? The solution is fairly simple again. Instead of providing these minority investors certain set of protection rights, the market is moving towards providing minority protection rights to a shareholding percentage itself, instead of giving it to, let's say, a certain investor. Just as an example, let's say there are 3 or 4 investors at a platform level holding 7%, 8%, etc. Instead of providing each investor a set of reserve matters, the focus is on providing 75% or 80% of the investors the right to approve a transaction or reject a transaction. So what do you achieve by this? And in fact, we're in the middle of a very interesting transaction like this, where there are multiple sophisticated investors. So what is the outcome that you're achieving? The outcome that you're achieving is that if there is one investor or 2 investors who are acting out of shape for whatever reason, the entire platform does not get impacted because of that, and you continue with whatever the activities are of the platform. So these are 2 important trends that have come up to make sure that the decision-making process at a platform level is more streamlined and more efficient. The third key trend that has come up, which also takes me to the next deal of the broad themes that we're supposed to discuss, is the deadlock resolution mechanism and what deadlocks are. Simply put, deadlock is a situation where, let's say, an investor and a developer are not on the same page on an important operational or management matter. And this again impacts the platform and brings the platform to a halt. Now, how do we best understand deadlock? I think the way we look at it is we divide this deadlock into two parts for convenience always. We look at low threshold deadlock items and high threshold deadlock items. What are these? So let's just take an example and see the consequences as well. Let's say there's a low threshold deadlock item, which is, let's take an example. There is a business plan. The business plan calls out procurement policies and also calls out suppliers who have to procure this. The developer, for some commercial reason, is not comfortable with a certain supplier, suggests an alternate supplier. The investor is not comfortable with the alternate supplier. Then the investor again proposes another deal. Developer is not comfortable with this. Both of them have reached a deadlock situation. What happens in a case like this? We actually go back and suggest to the parties that why don't we go to a third party independent expert? Let's say Shobhit, like you. Why don't we come to you? You pick this issue up. You know how the market functions. So these are minor issues that the platform can obviously resolve. So you look at all the reasons, you look at the concerns of both the sides, you come to a conclusion, and the parties abide by it so that the platform continues and is not stalled because of a minor procedural issue. This is how you look at low threshold deadlock items. How do you look at high threshold deadlock items? And what are high threshold deadlock items to begin? Let's again take another example. You have a situation where a developer thinks that units have to be sold much below the reserve price because of market conditions, something like this, COVID. Or there's a cost overrun and the developer thinks that we need to raise extra money through debt and the investor is not on the same page on something like this. What do? This is unfortunately a situation, metaphorically speaking, where you hit a dead end. You're looking at the devil of the deep blue sea. How do you resolve this? The resolution to this obviously has been discussed across multiple transactions. You look at a buy-sell mechanism, you look at selling the platform itself, otherwise, with both parties. But the underlying principle is that this is a genuine business disagreement between the developer and the investor. So no party as such is penalized because of something like this. You have a buy-sell, you can't complete the buy-sell for whatever reason, you go on to sell the project. If it's the project sale, if it's an outright sale, no problem, everybody is fine. But if it's a buy sell, specifically where, let's say, the investor is buying out the developer, then two small sub issues crop up. One is what happens to the branding of the project, and two is there a non-compete restriction on the developer? Branding becomes very key, and the question really is this, right? Will the developer be fine to allow the platform, which is now run by the investor, will the developer be fine to allow the investor to have the brand name continue, but the stake is bottom? The answer to that, in our experience, has always been no. No developer has ever been comfortable to give out their brand name or associate their brand name with a project that is not under their control and the output of which they cannot manage. They're very quality conscious, and anything that happens through the platform can directly impact them. So more often than not, what we've seen is that the investors have to agree to a buy sell with a rebranding option, and the rebranding option is what they'll have to eventually. An issue around, typically on default, you tend to penalize people. So you have the same call put option, you have the whole host of measures. You take control of the project, DM fee, IM fee, etc. You pull them back. But the concept is that if there's a call put, etc., you're looking at some sort of a penalty because the focus is on identifying whether there has been an intentional default. So these, I think, are the three important concepts that get picked up now from a governance perspective.
Yeah. So I think, yeah. So I think great. So I think,
Go ahead,
yeah.
go ahead, Ruchir, go ahead.
No. I was just completing that, but and I think differentiation between deadlock and default is always going to be a little critical. So I think people will debate that.
Shreyas, thanks for those very detailed sort of topics. Deadlock is, I've spent 3 weeks on deadlock resolution. It's a very difficult subject to talk about in 5 minutes. But I'm going to move over to Sanjay. Sanjay, I think the participants here would love to know your views, and I know I've heard you on so many webinars. A very quick view on where the market is heading, especially on the rental side. So commercial, really, are you guys going to double down? I'd asked this question to Varun. He nicely ducked it. But are you going to double down, stay put, or sort of contain yourself, given what we are hearing on the offices side? And will you be thinking, and will you think about setting up a new platform uh, to take it obviously to REIT? That's the big question given the success of Blackstone Embassy REIT in this market.
Thank you, Shobhit. Shobhit, our view is that we'd like to continue to grow our commercial platform. I personally believe very strongly about it, and I'll tell you why. It may be a little long answer, but I'm trying to be concise.
And Sanjay, just
From the
Sanjay, just for the fact that TCS has made this big announcement, so obviously the
yes,
group is thinking two different things. One group is saying that we don't need offices, and you are saying you're going to
no,
cut
no,
the
I'll
money.
decipher. I'll decipher that right here, right now. 20 years ago, not one, but most consultants, management consultants, uh, economists, developers, investors, prediction that global corporations are coming and outsourcing to India. Very soon, India will lose its cost arbitrage. And I'm taking you back exactly 25 years ago. Yeah. And therefore, they will not be able to sustain this growth. That was one. The second was the call center businesses from India went to Philippines. India will lose it's already lost, and therefore commercial real estate market will crash. And I remember those because I was part of those deliberations at that point of time. I was at the receiving end. Then came the global financial crisis. In between 8 and 10, we came down to 19 million. The space came down to 19 million square feet net absorption. But last year, we did 47 million square feet of net absorption. And I'm a bit because there are many end users who own their own campuses, etc., which are outside of developer space. So demand is much higher, but for the purpose of this discussion, this is the recorded data. Now, after global financial crisis, as part of a listed REIT in Singapore, I was part of a board where the experts from IT sector who were directors on the board claimed that artificial intelligence will take away all the jobs in the near future. Please stop all the investments. Real estate is going to crash, and we should not make any investments. And I'm telling you, this is live, one-on-one. Now we are talking about work from home. One truth between last decade or so, the office requirement for every business has come down. It's a reality. So if you needed 100 people in the office, most of them have already come down to 70 or 80. Then they reduced the carpet area because they did not want 125 square feet per person. They wanted 75 square feet per person. So they increased the density. We lost demand as a result of that also. And I have no doubt that artificial intelligence will take away some jobs, and there will be a reduction in office demand as well. So business need for office has come down and will come down, but does this mean that the office demand of India will come down? There are two different questions altogether. And I'll tell you why. Because 5 years ago, nobody in the research and investment and development space knew that Amazon is going to come and build 10 million square feet portfolio in India. Nobody knew that. Nobody knew that Flipkart is going to add 3 million square feet of space. Nobody knew the telecom company is going to set up their centers, and nobody knew that the cloud storage or data centers will rise in India. And that's where the answer lies, Shobhit.
So you're saying that new demand keeps
But
coming.
the size of the market grows.
Yeah.
So let me just, so in fact, this is quite interesting. A few days back, we had, Saurabh Mukherjee from Marcellus come in, and he pointed out to a very interesting trend. He said every single time there has been a US recession, there has been economic boom in India. Right from the 80s to 1993 to 2002, again 7 8, every single time there has been a US recession, there has been an economic boom in India. So
Yeah.
I
And
think
you're right.
we can bet on that.
No, Ruchir,
No, Sanjay.
I didn't want to delay my answer, but you're bang on. I'm glad you did it. The dollar rupee relationship has kept all multinational corporations at dollar per square feet per month rent for last 20 years.
In fact,
Which country will
it's,
give you same rent for 20 years?
in fact, it's 80 cents to a dollar, not even a dollar.
Yeah. And
I
and
think
India has largest collection of green buildings, defeating America. So our quality has gone up, by the way. And then in addition, outsourcing, residential is linked to domestic consumption, but office is linked to global consumption, Ruchir. Whether you are a IBM, Accenture, TCS, or any, the contracts above 1,000 to 2,000 people will come to India, period. So if you ask any global corporation, Shobhit, are they coming to India for real estate development, IT parks and SEZs, or they coming to India for talent? That will answer your question. And any 8% to 9% of the cost doesn't move the needle for them. Coming back to your other question, TCS angle, and I want to make sure that I promise you the correct. IT companies are very smart. They invented work from home. US outsourced to India 25 years ago. Cross continents and borders, crossing some within the city is not a big deal. They actually outsource 30-40% of the workforce 10-15 years ago. So they already outsource or work from home 20-30% of the workforce. They're just going to add few more. And these are functions, Shobhit, which are low margin businesses, which are repetitive in nature. Some will go to artificial, and they don't pay much salary to these people because these people are choosing a balanced work-life balance. A lot of young mothers don't want to work for late hours in the office. They want flexible work environment, and their cost is very low. It's a blended business model because IT industry for last 10 years been struggling on margins, and they wanted to do KPOs because to increase the margin, and therefore they found various ways. Lastly, I think India has built expertise, Shobhit. So everybody makes a point that look at Indians, the CEOs of the top IT companies and all that. But reality is that if you want to, if Accenture and IBM has over 55% of their global workforce in India, it says a story. Why I remember they wanted to cap global workforce to 10% in India 20 years ago. They have breached all their caps to 50-55%. And they will still increase, Shobhit. I'm telling you. And for the reason Ruchir mentioned, when the cost pressures and recessions takes place, you outsource more.
you find
not
cost efficiency.
Yeah.
So Sanjay, no, perfectly. You've answered all the questions saying, these are two very divergent views, and office will continue to grow because you'll find new demand and new takers, while IT will continue to work from home, which is fine. They do so globally and they can continue to do it. I think we've got about 5 minutes left. We had said originally 15 minutes for Q&A. Varun, any comment on things, and then we'll open it to Q&A. Any last comments?
No, so India stays an interesting market for us, not just for development profits, but we are also keen on core assets. And for all the reasons Sanjay mentioned, we think the market will stay relevant for investors like us. So many more years to come. Let's see.
Let's see.
I
Guys,
think
we have 5 minutes. If there's
Shobhit,
any questions.
just a few quick ones here, and I had a question for Varun, right? Maybe and maybe we can 5 minutes here and there. I think people can adjust a little bit. It's a very interesting
Yeah.
session. I think Varun, see, a lot of times, people feel that real estate has become like, uh, I won't say, but it's definitely a not so favored sector for the government, for whatever has happened. And that sort of edges onto the fact that, in terms of monetization, there is a REIT vehicle, but unlike infrastructure, in which monetization is very easy. We have allowed for private listed InvITs, unlisted InvITs with all tax benefits. Even today, when we do policy advocacy, and I was part of the REIT committee with SEBI, even that time there was so much apprehension to REITs, from a tax incentive perspective, which for infrastructure was like given free handed. Today, tell me, what is, I mean, when you look at monetization, right? I think I mean, the REIT story is there, but REITs can still not be private listed and they cannot be unlisted. While for infrastructure, it can be anything, InvITs have got all the tax benefits. Do you believe, or do you see a sense of challenge in terms of monetizing all your core assets? Do you really believe monetization is still in terms of passing hands, secondary transactions, or REIT is really the exit? Optimally, it is, but what's your business case theory in your minds when you buy a core asset?
So Embassy REIT we discussed has performed really well from listing. But in terms of the float, in terms of their shareholding, you would notice it's still in hands of large institutional investors rather than really having a broad-based investor base. So what we see panning out or growing from here is more and more institutional investors getting interested in core asset classes in India. Uh, so we have seen a couple of new entrants. We have seen some people who have stayed in the market for some time. Everyone is keen to get exposure to core assets, and so once we are sure that the location, the quality, the tenants we have selected for our project are optimum, we don't see the exit to be an issue. Like I said earlier, we don't consider an exit to be necessary in all the cases. In some cases, we are invested in those assets for long-term hold for ourselves. So I think that appetite, especially for a market like India, is not going away. It can only grow from here. Additionally, investors have accessed India market purely for development returns or value-add opportunistic kind of returns. Those are the guys who uh, faced issues post the 2008 2009 crisis, and many of them left the market for good in some cases. But the long-term investors who are now present in the market are happy to stay invested for a longer period. In some cases, they have local teams looking especially at that market. So that shows commitment from them for really long-term investments. And so I think that trend's gonna stay. Should not be an issue to, if you have a really good asset, should not be an issue to monetize.
Mm. Okay, interesting. I think we'll just open to questions, but I just wanted to make one or two quick comments. I think while foreign investors are looking at core assets, debt becomes a very important part of that capitalization from a tax optimization perspective.
Absolutely.
And there are routes that people can explore. So for instance, again, real estate doesn't get the benefit of it, but certain asset classes like industrial parks, ID parks, and warehousing qualify as infrastructure. And to that extent, there can be, people can use the foreign venture capital investment route, which allows foreign investors to have optionally convertible debentures, which gives the flavor of equity as well as debt, and without any sort of coupon restrictions, etc. So I think these are some of the interesting structuring trends I really wanted to talk about, but unfortunately we are running short on time. Again, there were certain parameters on structuring fund platform vehicles. I think AIF is an excellent vehicle that has come in where it has complete pass through, which developers wanting to become fund managers, which was earlier very difficult. You know, when we did this for some of the other development for funds or development managers, there was a huge issue in terms of setting up an offshore fund manager required RBI approval. Now it's very simple. And I would encourage developers to look at it from a fund manager's perspective. I think what Varun mentioned, that's extremely encouraging for some people, that some developers can actually become pure money managers and become pure fee earners and not really sourcing the deals, because deal sourcing is not such a big. I think we'll just open for quick 5 questions or something, just so that the people who've been attending, we're close to close to 550 participants, just to mention. And Shobhit, do you want to take one of the questions? There's so
I've
many
not
here.
got anything on my chat box, so I'm
Okay,
wondering.
I have a lot of them. So I think one question is, how important is the foreign exchange long-term outlook when doing a yield asset acquisition in India? Do funds look to time markets on acquisition? I think Varun, this is for you. Are you uh, are you really? I think it's really a question of bottom fishing. Do you do you really
No,
time your
when
acquisitions, or is
it's
it bottomed out or not?
consideration, we look at our in-house views on the how the FX rates are going to affect our investments. We typically underwrite for longer durations, and we have to undertake those kind of comparisons. We don't look to time the market. I don't think we can time the market, or it's very simple to time the market, because by nature of these transactions, especially in a market like India, you can't think that this week the FX gonna stay low. Let's buy one of the IT assets from Sanjay. It doesn't work like that. So it anyway takes longer. It's very difficult in these kind of transactions to time the market, especially for FX perspective.
I
I'll be
think
happy
Sanjay,
to
one
oblige,
question for
Ruchir.
you. Sanjay, one question is for you. One question is for you. Is that you said that all this demand will come in Flipkart and e-commerce and all of that, which has been existing for some time, and that should have really sort of boomed up the whole warehousing story, right? Warehousing should be in huge demands. Of course, there's a lot of capital coming in warehousing, but there's still a demand side gap.
Yes.
Why is that?
Uh, so warehouses, there are two things. One, the existing warehouse infrastructure is what office used to be 25 years ago. So it's very mediocre and compliance issues. So even if there is no demand, there is a inherent transition demand of 20, 30 million square feet. I believe over and above this, the way the GST has panned out, and the way urbanization is taking place, I believe there would be on an average 10 to 14 million square feet demand annually. And it's actually a great business model, because the moment you get your 100 acres sanctioned, you have to just do cookie cuttings, boxes, unless you're doing specialized cold storage, etc., etc. So it's very easy and quick to implement. So the turnaround time is fast. So I think that is a very stable business and is going to grow, in my opinion.
Very interesting. I think just before we end this, we are having separate sessions. I think we are doing a session on 27th on residential and developmental assets, on June 3rd on
Yes, yes.
warehousing, on 25th on credit secondaries. There are a lot of foreign investors who are wanting to buy these loan books of great assets, but selling 60, 70 cents to a dollar. So it's on securitization, etc. So we'll send you all details. And that's it. Shobhit, you want to give the closing remarks, please?
Great.
Happy to
Yeah.
do that. First of all, thank you again, everyone, for being patient and listening to us. We had some really good experts, Sanjay, Varun, Shreyas, and of course the host, Ruchir, sharing comments. Shreyas, especially you, we want to thank you. I think we all keep listening to markets, but to get some details on deadlocks and solving mechanisms and how committees and subcommittees can handle, and you've got experience in writing these documents, I think will is extremely helpful and perhaps a new subject for a lot of us. So thank you very much for detailing that out. What I've taken away from this panel is platforms are going to continue. Investors such as Allianz will, with long-term sort of capital will continue to invest in India. And yes, there may be a blip in office, but it's not as if it's going to wipe out. Sanjay believes that the market is going to come back with a little bit of a slow curve. And Ruchir, yours was the most interesting, saying every time there's a recession in US, India is benefiting. I wish whatever you said comes true, and I'm sure
We hope.
everybody in this panel must be thinking like that since we're all here.
Yes.
And with that, I'd like to thank you and hand it over back to you.
All right. No, thank you very much. Thank you so much, Sanjay. Thank you, Varun. Thank you, Shreya. Great. We will respond to the questions separately. There were a lot of questions. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.